Hi, everyone. Welcome to Chapter 7 on Thinking, Language, and Intelligence. This chapter, we're going to learn about how we think, how we learn language, how we use language, and how do we assess intelligence. And intelligence is always a controversial topic because there's people that can be considered book intelligent or people that can be considered culturally intelligent. And then the question of how you even measure intelligence. So does an intelligence test that was created in the 1930s really apply to our population today? And so this is a big area to look at and look at the theories, but also come away with some understanding of, as human beings, how do we think, how do we communicate, how do we make our way through the world? And what does this mean for the field of psychology? Thinking means paying attention to information. So we're understanding it mentally, we're reasoning about it, making judgments and decisions about it. So thinking refers to our conscious, planned attempts to make sense of the world and to change the world, to figure out our place in the world. Under thinking, we have concepts. And concepts are mental categories that we use to group together objects, relations, events, things that are abstract, that have common properties. So we're trying to group things together to make sense of the world. And thinking has to do with categorizing new concepts and manipulating the relationships among the concepts, as in problems like in geometry. So we tend to organize our information in hierarchies. And prototypes are good examples. So a simple prototype such as dog and red are taught by examples. So dogs are a positive incidence of the dog concept. But if a child calls a dog a horse, that would be a negative incidence because dogs are obviously not horses. So we can correct these by telling the child, this is not a dog, this is a horse. But it's the hierarchies of organizing concepts that help us make sense of the world. So for example, we may have a concept of how we can organize information. And we organize them perhaps by printed matter, which could be printed newspapers, notes, letters, books. So anything that's printed is one concept we have for storing information. Another concept is the electronic matter, the cloud, flash drives, hard drives, our tablets and smartphones. And so this is how we're organizing the concept of information to make better sense of it. Another cognitive skill we have is problem solving. And this is an important aspect of thinking. So this is something that we as humans can do, but it's not necessarily something that other species can do. So the first thing we need to do when we're trying to solve a problem is understand it. And to successfully understand a problem requires finding ways of relating one part of a problem to another in some type of meaningful way. And then we connect our mental representation of the problem to elements of the problem in the outer world. And then we apply our background knowledge to the problem. So these three steps we go through whenever we encounter problems helps us with problem solving. One of the ways to solve problems is through algorithms. And an algorithm is a specific procedure for solving a type of problem. And it gives you the correct answer if you follow the steps every time. So for example, if you get a piece of furniture that has to be put together, if you pull out the directions and you follow the directions step by step, you should be able to correctly put together the furniture. So following the directions step by step would be the algorithm. A heuristic is another way to solve a problem, but this doesn't guarantee you a correct answer every time. This is kind of taking a shortcut to solve your problem. So if you go back to the furniture, instead of following the directions, you use your past experience to say, okay, if it's a table, I know what a table looks like. I can figure out the tabletop and the legs and kind of where the screws go. So I'm just going to put it together without following the step-by-step directions. You're just making a general attempt to solve the problem of putting the table together. And when you finish, the table may not be together correctly, or it might be together correctly. It's not guaranteed that you will have a correct solution, but it is a quicker way of solving the problem. The means-end analysis is a type of heuristic, and in this problem-solving method, you look at the goal of where you want to be and then just kind of work backwards to your current situation to figure out how you can reach the goal. So if you know at the end of the semester you have a paper due, then if you work backwards and think, okay, I have this much time to do it, these are the steps I need to do from when I'm supposed to have the paper due until now, and reverse the process, then that helps you solve the problem of completing the paper. So that's means end analysis. And analogies refer to using a previous problem to solve a new problem. So say, for example, you go into an office building and you need to find the restrooms. Well, you've been in office buildings before, and typically restrooms are in the hallways, in the middle of the hallway. And so because you have solved that problem previously when you were in an office building looking for a restroom, you apply that same strategy to this new office building, and you will probably be successful in locating the restroom. So there are factors that affect problem solving. Experts can solve problems more efficiently and rapidly than novices do, or people that are new to the situation. So if you have somebody that's been working at a job for 5 years and a problem comes up, that person can probably solve the problem quicker than somebody who's brand new to the job. And people who are experts at solving a certain kind of problem have similar characteristics. They know the situation fairly well. They have a good memory for the elements in the problem. They can form mental images that facilitate problem solving. They relate the problem to similar problems, so that perhaps to other problems they've had in the past. And they are more goal-directed. They have efficient ways for problem solving. So experts use parallel processing, which is being able to deal with 2 or more elements of the problem at the same time, while novices use serial processing. So think simply of a toddler learning how to walk. The toddler is a novice at walking. So the toddler just focuses on taking one step at a time as he moves forward, maybe down the hallway, and that's serial processing, just focusing on that one step at a time. But say somebody is playing soccer, and so not only do they have to run, but they have to know the rules of the game, they have to kick the ball, they have to keep their eyes on the field. They are more experts at walking, so they are able to bring all of these elements together to solve the problem of how do I run around the field and play soccer at the same time. Another factor that affects problem solving is mental set. And this is our tendency to use an approach that was successful previously when we had a problem and try to apply it to a current problem. So think about parents that have several children. Maybe their first child went through a situation and they used their best parenting skills and everything was good. So when their second child goes through the similar situation, then they try to use the same type of parenting skills, and it may work, but it may not work. Even though it's a similar problem, the approach that they used before may not be as successful. One thing that can help with problem solving is insight. And in Gestalt psychology, insight is a sudden understanding of relationships in a problem that helps you find a solution. And insight's a pretty common term. But insight usually comes after some incubation. And incubation is where you just take your mind off the problem and then let the solution come to you. Oftentimes this happens just as you're falling asleep, or when you wake up in the morning, boom, you have the answer to a problem. And that's because you went through incubation, where you were able to just take your mind off the problem, and then you allowed insight to come up and help you find a solution. Functional fixedness is something that can prevent good problem solving. And this is a tendency to think of an object in terms only of its familiar function rather than other things that it can do. So think of the show MacGyver. MacGyver is a scientist, and he's an expert at finding different ways to use objects to get himself out of problems. So if you take a pen, and I give you a pen, and I say, what are you going to do with this pen? Pretty much all you can think to do is write with the pen. Well, think of everything else that you can use with the pen. You can use it to poke a hole in something. You can use it to maybe give somebody a tracheotomy if they're choking. You can use it as a straw if you take the ink out. So there's so many different uses that you can have for that pen. But if you're stuck on just thinking the only thing I can use with this pen is as a writing instrument, then that's functional fixedness. So most of us make our decisions or solve our problems using heuristics. We typically don't take a step-by-step approach. We don't, if we go into a grocery store, it's a brand new grocery store, and we're looking for green beans, we don't just go up and down every aisle until we find an aisle that contains green beans. That would take us forever. We would absolutely find them at some point, but that would take forever. Instead, we walk into the grocery store, we get a sense of where everything is, and then we even look at signs and signs that say canned foods. We relate that to thinking, well, this is probably the green bean area, and we go over to that aisle and look for it. Now, there may be a chance where that is not there, but probably it is there. So typically we use heuristics when we're making decisions. And there's different types of heuristics. One is representativeness heuristics, and this is when we make a decision about something based on the population that it appears to represent. So if you go to a school and you see an adult walking around, then you probably think that person is an educator. You don't think that person is there to do something else, like paint the school or to sell products, to sell you something. You just assume based on the location that that person is an educator, and that's representativeness heuristic. Availability heuristic is also used in decision making, and it's similar to the representativeness heuristic, but it's different in that we make our decisions based on the frequency of something that can pop up in our mind, how easy it is to find the answer. So if I ask you to list as many words that begin with the letter K that you can, then you'll be using the availability heuristic because these words are just going to pop into your head. If I ask you to list as many words as you can that have the letter K as the third letter, then that is much more difficult. That's not just available information that you can quickly access. Anchoring and adjustment heuristics are used when we see a situation, we make presumptions about it, but then we find out additional information and we adjust what we thought we first knew to fit in the new information. So, for example, my husband, when he started teaching at San Antonio College, he was very young. And so other professors thought he was a student. And simply because of how he looked, that he was young and he would carry a backpack, they assumed he was a student. And he would often go into the faculty restroom and they would try to kick him out, telling him, this is for faculty only, you're not allowed in here. And he would have to constantly explain to them time and time again, no, actually, I teach here. So that's an anchoring and adjustment. They were presuming that he was a student, but then when he gave them information to say that he was actually a faculty member, then they had to make some adjustments in their heuristic. Another factor that affects decision making is framing effect. And this is where words or context in which the information is presented can affect your decision making. So if you're about to have surgery and the doctor comes in and says, this is amazing, you have a 90% chance of survival for this surgery, it's really is going to be a successful surgery, you're going to feel a lot more comfortable. But if the doctor comes in and says, okay, we're going to do the surgery, but you have a 10% chance that you might die, that the presentation of that information is going to make you doubt whether or not you want the surgery. Even though it's the same statistics, 90% successful, 10% not successful, the fact that the 10% was emphasized will affect your decision making. Now, one of the problems with decision making can be overconfidence. So whether our decisions are correct or incorrect, we tend to be overconfident in the decisions that we make. And so there are several reasons for this overconfidence, even when we're wrong about our decisions. Oftentimes, we're unaware about how flimsy our assumptions are that help us with our decision making. And we tend to focus on examples that confirm that our decisions were right and ignore examples that the decisions were wrong. And because many of our working memories have limited space, we tend to forget information that runs counter to our judgments, to what we use to make our decisions. And oftentimes we use self-fulfilling prophecies, so we purposely focus on events that we believe in to prove that the decisions we made were the correct ones. So when we're talking about thinking, we're talking about our ability to problem solve, our ability to use concepts to help us organize our information into hierarchies, and the judgment about the decisions we make, determining whether the decisions we make were right or wrong for us. So let's move on to language. So language is a way that we communicate our thoughts and feelings, and we use symbols arranged according to our rules of grammar. One of the symbols we use in our language is words, and we choose words to represent other objects. So when we say banana, all of us have an image in our head of what a banana is. But if you grew up in a family where they taught you that a banana was actually called an apple, then that would be a different symbol for apple. So language makes it possible for us to communicate our knowledge to another person and for generations to communicate their experiences with each other. And this is a way that we can record our experiences. Through language, we're able to hear other people's stories and learn from their stories. We don't have to have a direct experience for everything that we learn, but we can learn through other people. So the language we use to communicate distinguishes us from other animals because we have properties such as semanticity, which is the sounds or signs of language that have meaning, infinite creativity, which is our capacity to create rather than imitate sentences, and displacement, which is our ability to communicate information about events and objects in another time or place. And this is something that hasn't been shown by animals to be able to do. Piaget is a cognitive psychologist that you will hear about often in psychology courses, and he believed that language reflects the knowledge of the world around us, but a lot of the knowledge can be acquired without language. So, for example, we understand what redness is even if we don't use the word red or know the word red. Babies around the world all develop language in the same sequence. This begins with pre-linguistic vocalizations of crying, cooing, and babbling. All babies do this. Even babies who are deaf can do this. But these sounds aren't symbols. They don't represent objects or events. They're just sounds, vocalizations that babies are making. Babies start saying their first words around 11 to 13 months, but babies can talk as early as 8 months and take longer, even up to 18 months is normal. As babies grow in their ability to speak, they develop into using hollow phrases. And hollow phrases are single words used to express complex meanings. So a baby or a toddler might point to a dog and just say doggy, but with their gestures and the way they're saying it, they're communicating a whole lot more to the parents than just dog. And toward the end of the second year, they begin to speak in two-word sentences, and this is termed telegraphic speech because it represents telegrams. And they might say, instead of, Daddy, will you sit down with me? They would just say, Daddy, sit. And that would, in their telegraphic speech, communicate with the dad that the baby wants the dad to sit next to her. Overregulation occurs in language development when babies tend to use similar grammar rules but use them incorrectly. So instead of saying, I went to the bathroom, they might say, I go to the bathroom. And they're still learning the rules of grammar, so they're going to make these mistakes, and that's called overregulation. By the age of 6, children's vocabularies have expanded to 10,000 words, and by 7 to 9 years of age, they realize that words can have more than one meaning. And this is when they really start telling riddles and jokes. And if you're around kids this age, they might be following you around with their riddle book, telling you all the riddles that they've learned, and they're amused by it, and they think they're hilarious. But that's just a normal part of their language development. And then, obviously, the language grows more complex between elementary and high school years, especially when they get into middle school and they can start thinking more abstractly. Then they start developing a greater command of language. So language development reflects the interactions between nature and nurture. And so babies and children raised in homes where there is a lot of spoken word, where there's books read to them, are going to be able to develop more complex languages than babies that are raised in homes where they aren't talked to very much or they're not read to very much. And so learning theorists see language as developing according to the laws of learning. From a social cognitive perspective, parents serve as models. So children learn language through observation and imitation of the parent. And this is where we see young children who might cuss when they're out in public, and all they're really doing is imitating what they hear from their parents. And then everybody laughs and thinks it's cute, but then as these children get older and continue to cuss when they get into middle school and high school, then it really does stop being so cute. So parents do need to be careful of what children observe in the home. The nativist approach to language development believes that innate factors, which is our nature, cause children to learn language in certain ways. So according to the psycholinguistic theory, language acquisition involves the interaction of environment, which could be parental speech and how parents reinforce what children are learning, and our inborn tendency to acquire language. Noam Chomsky is a big proponent in the natives' approach to language development, and he refers to inborn tendency as language acquisition device, or LAD. So we are born prepared to learn language. Our nervous system is prepared to learn grammar, and this is something that is universal. One of the ways we help children learn language is through infant-directed speech. And this is how we talk to little kids. And for some people, this isn't a comfortable way of communicating, but it is something that's preferred by babies and toddlers when they're learning to speak. And these are when we speak to babies and toddlers more slowly and at a higher pitch. The higher pitch draws their attention. When we use smaller, briefer sentences just with key words in them, shorter sentences. When we add Y to nouns. So instead of saying dog, we say doggy. Or instead of blanket, we say blankie. And we often repeat sentences and duplicate words because this repetitiveness and this reinforcement helps children learn. And we focus on naming objects, and we may over-describe them. So if ever you see people with little kids outside, they'll say, oh, look at that doggy. The doggy has 4 legs, and look at the doggy. He's sitting and wagging his tail. And they just kind of narrate what they're seeing. And parents often speak for their children. And this could simply be because people just don't understand what their toddlers are saying, so they're having to translate for them, or their children get really shy when it comes time for them to speak. But infant-directed speech is preferred by children and encourages children to start speaking on their own. So we've looked at problem solving and we've looked at language, all big parts of cognitive psychology. Lastly, let's look at intelligence. And intelligence is closely related to thinking. And this is the ability to understand the world and cope with its challenges. So intelligence can't be directly seen or touched, but it is directly tied to achievements such as school performance and occupational status. According to the factor theories of intelligence, intelligence is made up of a number of mental abilities that we have, ranging from one kind of ability to hundreds. And Charles Spearman suggested that behaviors people consider intelligent have common factors, and that's, he labeled G for general intelligence. So people have a general intelligence about them, and that's our ability to have broad reasoning and problem-solving abilities. But he also saw that people might be superior in one area more than another, and so he called this factor S for a specific ability for intelligence. Lewis Thurston was an American psychologist who conducted research, and he found that everybody has 8 specific factors for intelligence, and these are what he labeled primary mental abilities. And some of us are stronger in some areas than in others. And these are the areas of abilities that he identified: visual and spatial abilities, perceptual speed, numerical ability, verbal meaning, memory, word fluency, deductive reasoning, and inductive reasoning. So he saw these as specific factors that we have, and some of us are stronger in one area or maybe 2 areas, and others are stronger in other areas. The theory of multiple intelligence was developed by Howard Gardner, and he referred to each kind of intelligence in his theories as an intelligent because they differ so much. He believed that there are a number of different intelligences, not just one. So language ability and logical and mathematical ability are 2 of them, but he also saw kinesthetic talents like those shown by dancers and athletes, musical talents, spatial relation skills, and other kinds of intelligence as being just as important. The triarchic theory of intelligence was created by Robert Sternberg, and he constructed 3 prongs of intelligence that includes analytical, creative, and practical. So analytical intelligence is defined as our academic ability. Creative intelligence is our ability to cope with new situations and generate many possible solutions. And practical intelligence is another term maybe for street smarts, and it's the intelligence that people have to deal with other people, including difficult people, and to meet the demands of whatever environment they find themselves in. Another theory of intelligence focuses on emotional intelligence, and this is the ability to have exceptional social and emotional skills, and these are just as important as academic skills. And so the failure to develop our emotional intelligence is connected with a poor ability to cope with stress, to be more depressed, and perhaps even have more aggressive behavior. Creativity is an important part of intelligence, and creativity is the ability to come up with new ways to solve problems. So creative people share a number of qualities. They take chances. They refuse to accept limitations. Creative people tend to appreciate art and music, and they use common materials to make unique things, like what we were talking about with the pen earlier. Creative people tend to challenge the social norms, and they tend to take unpopular stands. They don't go along with the crowd. And they tend to challenge ideas that other people just accept at face value. So creative thinkers have convergent thinking. And this is where the focus is limited to what is right there in front of us, to the present facts. And we narrow our problem-solving skills to find the best solution. In divergent thinking, as problem solvers, we associate freely with the elements of the problem, and we don't put limits or boundaries around what a solution can be. We're more open to finding different solutions. So problem solving can involve both kinds of thinking. And at first, divergent thinking helps generate many possible solutions, but convergent thinking is then used to focus on one solution and reject others. In an effort to understand how well we think or our intelligence levels, IQ tests started being developed. And in the early 20th century, the French public school system was looking for a test that could identify children who weren't likely to benefit from regular classroom instructions. They were looking for the children who needed the extra help. So the first version of this test was called the Binet-Simon scale, and it was created in 1905. And basically, this scale looked for a mental age, and the mental age showed the intellectual level at which a child was functioning. So the child might be 12 years old, but functioning at a mental age of 6. Lewis Terman adapted the Binet-Simon scale for use with American children at Stanford University. And this is the result of the Stanford Binet Intelligence Test that was published in 1916 and still is used today, although in a different format. And this version created an intelligence quotient, or IQ, rather than a mental age. And so the IQ from this test looks at the relationship between a child's mental age and his or her actual chronological age. So the IQ, we're looking at where maybe a 12-year-old should be functioning, and if the 12-year-old's functioning at a 12-year-old level, then the IQ would be average, which is 100. If a 12-year-old's functioning at a 3rd grade level, then the IQ would be lower, and if a 12-year-old's functioning at a 10th grade level, then the IQ would be higher. So it's looking at the relationship between age and ability level. Another intelligence test is the Wechsler intelligence test, and this is an intelligence test that can be used with both children and adults. And the Wechsler scale looks at different subtests for looking at intelligence, different performance tasks. So instead of just saying overall this is an IQ, we can look at this is a person's ability in writing, this is a person's ability in reading verbally, and so forth. And it gives perhaps a more complete picture of a person's ability level. Group IQ tests are often used in schools when they're just trying to get a general idea of how well students are doing, and these are usually used for gifted testing. So they'll give a group test to a bunch of students, and then based on those scores, pull out the students who they think might be gifted and provide further tests. Are not as reliable as individual testing, but it is a quicker way to help identify students who might be excelling and could benefit from further testing. So here's a curve showing the bell-shaped curve showing IQ scores, and 100 is average. So anywhere between 90 and 110 on the IQ score is considered average. And then you have below average and above average, and that helps, at least in school situations, understand where children are capable and maybe what areas they need to have more support to help them reach their full potential. There have been differences that have shown up in these intelligence tests, and these are differences that could be attributed to socioeconomic and ethnic differences, because intelligence tests may have been culturally biased when they were developed, and so some culture-free tests have been developed to address these problems. And intelligence tests do not show any overall gender differences in cognitive abilities, so one gender is not more or less intelligent than another. Genetics do influence intelligence. In kinship studies, they found that IQ scores of identical twins are more alike than for any other pairs, and there's some moderate correlations in IQ scores between fraternal twins, siblings, and parents and their children. So genetics definitely does play a role in intelligence. In adoption studies, there's a strong relationship between the IQ scores of adopted children and their biological parents, more so than between children and their adoptive parents, showing the influence that genetics has on intelligence. And between 40 and 60% of the differences in IQ scores can be attributed to heredity. Although intelligence has a strong genetic component, the home environment definitely can develop intelligence or hinder it. Parenting styles affect IQ scores. Organization and safety in the home have been linked to higher IQs and achievement scores. So if a child's growing up in a home that's not safe or where they're being traumatized, it can affect their IQ. And the home environment is an important predictor of IQ scores among children aged 3 to 8. That's why we have all of these early childhood programs that are being developed, because we know the importance of working with children in these younger ages. Philosopher John Flynn found that IQ scores in the Western world increased substantially between 1947 and 2002 by about 18 points in the United States. And so it was argued that people's genetic codes couldn't possibly have changed that much in half a century to account for the big change in their IQ scores. And they concluded that social and cultural factors such as improved education and the effects of mass media must have influenced the change in IQ scores. So what these studies have shown us is that IQ scores are affected by genetics, environment, and things that are occurring at the time that a child is developing. And it's not an easy answer as to why some people have higher IQ scores than others, but there are a lot of factors involved with helping people develop their intelligence. All right, guys, that's it for this chapter. I hope you have a great week, and please contact me if you have any questions.